Vielleicht siehst du ihn dann mal wieder.
Das ist ja schon lange. Schlimm, was unlängst.
Hello and welcome to episode number 46 of the VCD Roundtable. We are still in Dubai at the Com Division kickoff, and in today's episode, which is episode number 46, we are going to cover health checks. Sasha.
Yes, hello and welcome from Dubai. So we will cover health checks. We'll speak a little bit about what's important on a health check and why every service provider should get a health check or should do a health check of the complete environment every year at least.
All right, let's do health check. Start with Sasha. All right, you still have a pulse. Not that bad. Hello, welcome from Dubai.
Hi guys.
Today with us is Abdel.
Yeah. So I'm Abdel. I am a new joined employee with Com Division. Yeah, Com Division. Yeah. I'm a senior consultant, basically around NSX and VCF, and this is my first roundtable with the guys here, and hopefully we have fun.
Of course we will.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Okay, look, Sasha. So you started the whole opening thingy with health checks. So what's important? Why is it important for CSPs to actually have a health check, letting us sneak into the infrastructure and just putting the finger into all these holes and saying like, oh, there might be an option to do something better or even different?
So what we saw in our experience with all of the service provider, where we have written the architectures, where we supported on other questions, also in the normal support, often if they are not fast enough with the Broadcom support or in the older days VMware support, we figured out that most likely most of the service providers' problems are the same ones or coming from the same direction. Same with the enterprise stuff. So there are a lot of points where the service provider have not the correct architecture, have maybe updated their environment, but not changed the architecture stuff. Because if I go to a new release, I also need to take care that all of the required changes will be done for the new architecture. And because of that, it's important to take a look at the infrastructure, take a look what is running like expected, what maybe needs to be changed.
All right, guys. And now, sorry, Sasha, pardon the interruption. And now we just demo that it is live because Aya just arrived. Aya, we're already live. Maybe a few words, introduce yourself.
Sure. Where's the camera?
The camera is just in front of you.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Hi to whoever's watching. My name is Aya. I'm a senior consultant at Com Division. I've been working with the VMware infrastructure, VMware by Broadcom infrastructure for around more than 3 years, 4 years now. So, yeah.
And now we proved that it's actually live.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sasha, pardon the interruption. So, we're discussing health checks today. And Sasha just started coming up with like why are health checks important, pointing out what an architecture should be, could be, and what's achievable, sticking with an architecture and just think before you implement.
Yes, and so we did a lot of health checks in the past. We are currently working or reworking our health checks, reworking on the problems. So also take a look at all of the support tickets from the last year and really take a look how we can prevent it, how we can see the problems before the problems really become a problem for your environment, for your customers as a service provider.
So I like the approach and the thinking you have shared with us. And also we take a very standardized approach. But I think it's important to point out that for us, a health check is not just to run a few scripts and take the results from the scripts and add it into a document, the results of the script in a document in an automated way, and just come up with some automated documentation pointing out some things. So big parts of a health check needs to be or are a manual approach, just really look into the details of that specific infrastructure to find out what's important and what could be done different or maybe better with that specific infrastructure.
I think when we look at all of this is becoming more important also now that service providers start to prepare for their transition either into VCF 5.2 or in the near future into VCF 9, because from that perspective, customers or service providers need to prepare and need to be sure that they understand what needs to change potentially in their infrastructure before they can actually move into VCF. So especially now, a health check is becoming more important than it was potentially in the past. But as you said, Matthias, I think it's very important to say is like, while we can collect a bunch of data over scripts, it's always important that a health check also involves like a manual procedure where we go really over systems, because you can only test to a certain degree with scripts, but a perfect example I always use is looking into the advanced settings in vSphere is always a good idea, because no matter what you do with the scripts, you need to ask for a very specific setting. And sometimes customers might have a setting from a specific vendor. And I have seen sometimes settings which have been around for multiple years, including things which could actually horribly go wrong, because if you're sitting in a health check, just to give a very quick example, and you identify that they changed the isolation addresses for HA, and then you ask is like, so which are these systems? And then the answer is, oh, these IP addresses we are not using for the last 3 years anymore, which goes perfectly well as long as all your infrastructure is well working. But if you would actually have a major outage, that would be a lot of fun then.
I mean, I totally agree with everything you're saying. I think a health check is very important nowadays. It's not like something optional. I guess it should be like a must, you know, like every customer, especially service providers, should do a health check. If not like a monthly basis, because it could be like, you know, a bit hard for them, at least quarterly basis, because like customers, depending, you know, on their size, they might have like lots of employees that are, you know, using the VMware infrastructure. So the thing is that they might do changes and like another team member cannot know what these changes are. So this unsiloed team. So the thing is doing a health check, you know, covering each point and not through scripts, you know, being customized with like for each customer. I think this is a must, and it would really like find, you know, things that you did not even know that are existing or applying in your infrastructure. So I think it is definitely a must and super helpful thing that we all need to do and encourage, you know, our customers to do.
And adding, right, we have done many implementations. So for certain implementations, you're just adding some advanced settings, which make perfectly sense regarding a specialized storage system. So it's, every vendor provides like, please apply setting ABC to better fit the solution provided by us. And then you might change even just the storage vendor, or come up with a new cluster and the cluster has a different storage solution, and you just apply the predefined values without thinking, because it's just a standard in your inside your customer. But with the new storage solution, it might just cause issues.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that everyone can run scripts, right? It's not tied to a certain company or a certain service provider. Anyone can run scripts, but if you run the health checks with an architect or a consultant, it actually turns from a manual point running. I mean, if you run through manual points across all the configuration, it actually turns into a discussion with the service provider, and that turns into a better discussion on how can we enhance the environment, how can we enhance the infrastructure, what are the missing parts here, what are the missing parts there, and then we can come up with a complete, or I would say near a perfect infrastructure for the service provider to provide their customers.
And it's even though you have that setting, as you mentioned, you start a discussion, and then the customer ideally comes up with, oh, we made a decision based on a business requirement and the solution we're using. That's the documentation. That's just the justification. Why this setting has been applied. And then you come up like, oh, from an architectural perspective, it's now a trade-off, because that is not working any longer because of, and then you can start over like, oh, need to come up with a new decision and justify why we're changing it in a specified way and document it again, and then we have it safe for the future.
Exactly, because that requirement might have been valid 3 years ago, but it's not valid as of now. So
it's always a document, an architecture and documentation is a living creature, which changes over and over and over. But if you do an architecture just once and then rely on it, and you change something in the back end, like changing a vendor or whatever, you need to also reconsider changing the architecture in order to as you've made.
And additional to that, so we are in with all the changes now with the licensing going from the old license model to VCF, so maybe a lot of design decisions were taken with the old license model in the background. So maybe we have a lot more options yet how to solve problems with all license more or less included, especially with the ARIA operations and the ARIA logs. So we can give much more informations how you can solve your problems much better than you are currently doing it.
Especially from a pricing perspective, a license pricing perspective, because in the past you didn't care about certain values and metrics, but nowadays with the whole VCF licensing game, few parameters just changed, like the cores. Now we charge per core and not per memory anymore, so that's a different ball game.
Yeah, also the point was, sorry. Also, go on.
Today we're a big group. Everyone wants to share thoughts.
Everybody wants to be on the microphone. And I think when you look at it in so many other areas, it's like what Aya said, it's so common that we get things checked, whether it's we get our cars into maintenance, if we go into to a physician to actually get ourselves checked up. If you go into a hospital, you don't want to run into an MRT, which has actually been there for 5 years and no one knows if it runs optimal. Everybody potentially looks at the MRT, but does everybody look at the IT infrastructure behind the MRT?
But honestly speaking, coming up with medical devices and how often they update the infrastructure behind an MRI, it might not be the best example.
The checkups of the devices are still that often. So the health check is not about the software updates itself, because I mean, in many cases, those are totally isolated systems, so that is not a problem. If you look into a lot of aviation systems, you will find with Microsoft Windows versions, which are outdated for a very long time period, but they are still in that specific use case perfectly fine because it's running in an isolated system. When you take most airplanes, most of these onboard systems is like they are still using, in some cases, floppy disks to update flight management.
Did you again 3-print the safe icon?
Something like that. And I think when we look at this, applying it to both service providers and enterprises, this should become far more a normal procedure on a regular basis, because you're basically building your complete company around it. If your infrastructure implodes, then this is a bad thing. And as much as we do this sometimes already for security, we should do this for basic infrastructure services as well. And it can be a pretty straightforward process if everything is fine, and if you do this on a regular basis, like what Aya said. It's not necessary. It's not a multi-week project. This can be done in hours or maybe a few days, depending on the size of your infrastructure and the complexity, amount of products, etc. But this does not need to be a very harmful process. And in most cases, we don't need to even touch anything and change anything actively in the infrastructure.
No, it's again, and even if we talk about CSPs and enterprises, you mentioned a health check for a CSP is different compared to an enterprise, because they run the infrastructure differently. It is a different use case. It needs a different configuration. It needs to have a different look at how that infrastructure is configured and used.
Maybe it has less products as well.
Yeah. Maybe, or differently configured because of.
But that is an important point. It's like if you are a service provider out there shopping for a health check or a validation, this is what we have seen in the past, where people were just applying, like there was this in the old days, these vSphere optimization assessments, which some people just used as a health check. Some of the outcomes were actually contradictory to the Cloud Director settings. So if people were to follow that blindly because it was just a script, that could have completely broken Cloud Director, because some of the systems might request and say it's like, you have 3 levels deep of resource pools. That is not necessarily the best idea. You have your N6 instances in a resource pool. That is maybe not the best idea. Whereas reality is, in a CSP environment with Cloud Director, there are good reasons why we do these things. So just a script is not necessarily a good idea, and it needs to be specialized for the use case like a CSP.
Exactly. So that's why it's very handy to have a consultant or an architect doing that whole health check and not just rely on some scripts.
Yeah, you need to have a very long list. So I had this discussion with a lot of service providers where we discussed why we are doing health checks, and many of our secondary white labels, also bigger ones, asked us for doing health check, because they said, hey, we have a normal vSphere environment experience, but not more. We are currently have no information about what's VCF, what's coming in VCF, what are the requirements to move to VCF. That's also a readiness assessment health check. And all of that combined means you need really a partner who has the experience in Cloud Director, in vSphere, and in this combination, because what Yves mentioned before, there are some normal health checks in the market, but that's not directly covering the needs and the requirements of Cloud Director.
I think the key thing here that we're focusing on doing with our customers is to, let them benefit from the product that they have in all its aspects, So what we're trying to do is, maybe they only know vSphere, but we're trying here to train them on the whole stack, NSX, the whole VCF stack, ARIA, everything. So we're not just offering them here like a health check solely. It's just as well we're gonna, train them, or like at least deliver our knowledge to them so they know how to use this.
Absolutely.
Full stack, especially now with
like introduce something additional.
Exactly.
With but if we introduce like operations manager or VCF operations, something else like, and you use it proactively, you could have seen an issue earlier on and react proactively instead of having customers complaining about a performance issue.
Exactly.
Or just optimize your infrastructure overall. Using VCF operations, you can actually optimize the infrastructure. So, like you said, just mitigate any error that might have come up, or basically just I don't know how to say, but balance your resources to a point that you feel like a service provider that you are getting your ROI in the correct way. So,
and monitor an SLA, for example.
Yeah.
Because I've seen service providers reporting back to their customers, we are offering SLA, whatever, and they even have no idea if they fulfill the reported or the agreed SLA. So a health check is also introducing additional monitoring options to validate if the offering a customer have signed for is still true and they fulfill everything. So it's also kind of a legal perspective. Am I able to actually provide what the customers have signed for?
That is one of the areas. The other areas, I think, is also always to look closely into the fact how this can help you from an internal perspective. So not only from a management perspective down, using a health check to potentially get some protection and getting an idea if everything runs as it should be. It sometimes can also be helpful for the admin themselves to request, can't we actually get someone in for a health check, so that we can confirm to management that we are truly actually doing it to best practices, that we learn with the health check, as Aya said, about how we should configure things, or that we learn how to utilize ARIA operations, like what Abdel said. So there are so many different aspects you can take out of it. And my experience has always been is sometimes for the admins, they feel a bit held back in the beginning when especially when it is ordered more or less by management, because people feel like it's like, oh yeah, no, someone is coming and actually checking if I'm really doing my job. I would always argue is like, don't see these health checks as a job guarantee or anything else. It's like, this is really there to actually check the infrastructure and fix issues potentially. Because let's face it, the difference is you are running your infrastructure on a daily basis. So you have a focus and you are completely isolated on that specific infrastructure. You might see maybe a customer infrastructure from time to time, but you more or less have one approach, what you always have been doing. And the big advantage is if people from our team are actually doing the health check, we see maybe in a week 5-10 different cloud provider infrastructures. We design every quarter X amount of new cloud directory infrastructures. We constantly need to keep ourselves updated with what is the current best practice, because this is something we have seen very, very often. It's like settings which have been the best practice 2 or 3 years ago are no longer the best practice because people have figured out they are not working. A few years back, we were telling people, it's like, no, don't put a hard disk or put a disk device into your server for a boot device. A USB stick is the perfect solution. We all learned that that was not the best idea. And so this had to be turned around again. There are so many of these examples of the last 10, 15 years, and this does not only apply to VMware, this applies to Microsoft, to nearly every vendor. Best practices change, and also keep in mind, not every best practice applies to every infrastructure.
So the only constant in life we have is change. And sometimes an external view into an infrastructure might just enlighten people like, oh, I completely overlooked a certain configuration. Yes, thanks for mentioning it. It's not a health check. It's not meant that we are coming to a CSP and just start finger pointing. Yeah. Oh, that's wrong, that's whatever. It's also about like, oh, that's a really nice configuration, or oh, that's an interesting configuration. Could you please explain why is it configured that way? And then you get the explanation like, oh, that makes perfectly sense. Thank you. And that's also validation if the documentation is properly done. Because if someone can explain, oh, this is justification why we have made that decision, it shows back that you have a proper, well-maintained documentation.
Good. So if you want to do a health check, don't have it included. I mean, our service providers, some have it included in the service pack, so we do it with them at least on a yearly basis. Some have it via the initial white label program as a startup fee. But if you're not in any of these programs, I mean, clearly the best solution is become part of our service pack program, get the support from us and all of these things. And then you get your yearly health check and many other things like challenge days, architecture thinking, and stuff like that included potentially. But if you say you want to just actually do a health check, Sasha.
Yeah, just reach out to us, drop us a message, and we will schedule a meeting and we can set you a quote for a health check. So it's a bit depending on how many data centers, how many infrastructures, what products are used. But we have a fixed fee engagement, so that also means we give you one price, fixed fee, and then you have the real outcome for your environment.
So an infrastructure is like a human being, right? The longer it lives, the older it gets, the more often it needs a checkup.
So you run to the doctor every week?
I should.
So all of that being said, I think that's a good approach. And maybe what we do in maybe a few months' time, not too fast, we take, as we are just revamping the new health checks out there, we do a bit of a sum up story and actually consolidate the most funniest things we have found in the last 6 months in health checks and make an episode about that. See, Sasha, you have already a topic for it.
Perfect for episode 53.
So that being said, any final words to say, Matthias?
Yeah, it was great talking about health checks. Thanks to Ian and showing up first time VCD Roundtable, and we proved that it's live.
Yeah.
And Sasha, I really need a checkup and a health check. Please take care of me.
Absolutely.
We'll take care of you, don't worry.
We'll
run the health checks for you.
All right, now I need to run. Bye.
Abdul, any final words?
I'm really looking forward for our CSPs to come in and have this discussion. I'd rather say, and come up with the best solution moving forward for them and their customers, of course.
Good. So as we are going to chase up Matthias now, I would say thank you all for listening into episode number 46, Health Checks, and this was live from Dubai. Next week we are going to be in 2 weeks back in our home offices, I think.
Let's take a look from
we will see. Sasha and I have been on the road for nearly 4 weeks again. So hope to see you again soon. If you have any topic ideas, if you have anything like that, feel free to drop them in the comments below the section, and hope to see you and hear you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
See you.